Hi, my name's Darran. I'm a non-fiction writer primarily, and I come from Ireland. So this book was my last book, and it's a collection of objects. And what I tried to do from the beginning was let the object tell me the story. So objects that I mostly found in my childhood home. I would try and let the object tell the story rather than imposing one. And this chapter that I'm going to read is one of the few where that didn't happen. So it's one where someone told me the story rather than the object telling me the story. So it's called Recording Device. My father was in the living room, his feet up, having a drink, watching old footage of 1970s bands on a German television show. For some time he had been wobbling, struggling with his health, I don't know. The fact that Dad kept it all silent, stoical, except the times he no longer could, only made it more quietly terrifying. As he got older and he got aches and his tendons became frayed, he no longer had the distraction of jogging the bridges at night or hitting the gym. But it seemed more than physical. He had enough time on his hands to realize there was more spent than left. I worried if there was something else at play, something early onset, or perhaps something late onset. I remembered a quote from one of the art books I used to cut up by the artist Otto Dix, referring to experiences in the war, one of the wars, about how trauma got harder with the years, how time didn't heal old wounds, as people said, and things actually got worse, or returned as the adrenaline rush of youth died away. I quote, "As a young man, you didn't notice at all that you were, after all, badly affected. For years afterwards, at least 10 years, I kept getting these dreams in which I had to crawl through ruined houses, along passages I could hardly get through," unquote. As life settled, narrowing into routines and certainties, it just kept narrowing for some people, to the point of claustrophobia. The walls kept getting closer, and the sky with it. Not long ago, talking about what happened in the Troubles might get you killed. And so people were silent, or when they spoke, consummate storytellers that they are in the North, it was a way of not addressing subjects. It was a diversion. Silence, nevertheless, tended to prevail. Now people do not talk for fear of rocking the boat. Now they are silenced by the mantra that tourism and investment will cure all ills. There has been no truth and reconciliation process. Collective amnesia is official policy. Journalists overhearing confessions from the bad old days are subject to having their homes raided by the police. We are told that this silence is different. This is a better form of silence. This is progress. The schools remain segregated. The cities remain internally divided. The trauma is, against all the lessons of psychiatry, buried. The peace process is disrupted and undermined, but it always had a problem for all the relief that the respite of violence is given. The North remains a patient in a medically induced coma. My father had started drinking late in life. Previously, he'd suffered from what I thought were cautionary hangovers, as if his body knew the inclinations in his genes and had a kind of internal alarm system, given he'd had 2 alcoholic parents, and so his body was punishing him as a deterrent. Then suddenly, he started drinking heavily in his middle age. It didn't seem to suit him, and I doubted what good it did, especially given the quantities that he was downing. But I recognized my own hypocrisy, given that I drank too. I justified it by telling myself that I had grown into drinking while my father had plunged into it. So I would sit up with him and we'd watch these vintage music programs, the Old Grey Whistle Test, a German show called Beat Club, prog rock and blues revival bands, Tim Buckley and Van the Man. And we talk about old bands and all those records and boxes in the attic. It was one of the rare times we'd be animated together. Would you change it at all? I asked him. What? The past. If you could go back. And he laughed. You can't though, can you? We kept watching the music videos. There was no need to talk after a while. The passing of a bottle said more than language could. Eventually Dad went out to the kitchen to get a drink, and then I'd hear him shuffling off upstairs to his bed. And I would sit there drinking, thinking to myself. And it was a while before I even realised the footage had stopped on the screen. And then one night, I decided to talk to him finally, properly. And Dad told me. He told me about growing up in the camp, about his father dying, about surviving playing at the edge of a whirlpool, about shootouts and arrests and internment, his brother, a bricklayer, on the run. He remembered a stolen car with bullet holes in it, screeching up to their house in the early hours of the morning, and how spectacular and blue the sky looked. He told me about the scar on his leg and the lie that he got it from climbing a fence when it was a flesh wound from a bullet. How he was set up by an informer, chased into the Phoenix bar and then captured. How he was charged with explosives and membership in attempted murder. He was 16. He told me about interrogations. He told me of a fear so deep and immediate it was like a person, a presence in the room. He told me about helicopter journeys across the country and of blindfolds and being thrown out at an indeterminate height. He spoke of the dreaded Crumlin Road Jail, where they went to town on suspects and guilt or innocence was incidental. He spoke of white noise and beatings and stress positions and sleep deprivation and torture and the doctors they brought in to monitor the torture and how they worked on you in shifts and then they went home to their homes to play happy families at the weekends, and then they came back and they started it all over again. And the whole time they were away with their families, you hadn't slept for more than a second that you could grab standing up. He remembered their faces. He spoke to me about Long Kesh, a former Allied aircraft base, and the cages. He told me about prisoners sent from the prison hulk HMS Maidstone, which was moored in Belfast Lough. He told me about returning to live in the Nissan huts after only a few years in a brick house from one kind of jail to another. He spoke of other things, camaraderie between prisoners, because of and despite having 40 to 80 of them in each hut. He spoke of how they personalised the partitions, how they read everything from Frantz Fanon to Brendan Behan, and gave classes and played football and hung their clothes on the wire. He told me of knowing the main players, heads as they were called, which meant a good guy, someone who knew the crack in terms of music and culture, including Bobby Sands, who was just one of them, not a martyr or a saint or a villain, but just a young fella who he remembered playing the guitar and making up songs. He told me of escape plans and of guards digging water-filled ditches around them to prevent tunnelling. He spoke of carving woodwork to pass the time and of records being smuggled in. Brian Eno's Here Come the Warm Jets was one, which my father didn't care for. He told me of it almost admiring the loyalist who had smuggled in a goldfish. And he told me of messages being smuggled out and how the huts had burned in 74. They moved them eventually to the Maze, which was a brutalist concrete hitch block. And their political status as POWs was removed, and they were to be treated as common criminals. They were placed in individual cells, and the screws were hostile from the beginning. He spoke of the surveillance, the burning away the hours of the only youth you'd ever have. He told me of tapping messages along the pipes to the other cells, the continual noise, how the prison officers searched the prisoners, taking them to the circle, making them squat naked over a mirror and probing their behinds and then their mouths with the same glove. He told me that pain was not enough. Shame was also required. He spoke of how he and a cellmate had pushed their mattress up against the cell door as they listened to riot police come down the aisle, cell by cell, beating the occupants inside unconscious. They were waiting their turn. Not much more than kids. And he told me about stress and how it is buried, of the 5 years of protests and how, right as he was being released, it was all escalating towards the latter-day Catholic martyrdom of the hunger strikes. And that same Bobby Sands writing on the first day of his dying, quote, "I am standing on the threshold of another trembling world," unquote. Bobby was not the only one. Except none of this conversation happened. We just kept watching music. All the information I possessed came from unverified snippets from other people or was overheard in unguarded moments. We never spoke. They were likely true, and there were many truths never expressed, but we could not begin to talk about any of it directly, because how or where do you begin? Thank you.